to Peak Into COS. This episode is brought to you from the Studio 809 Community Podcast at The Next Us, a professional cooperative environment for small businesses in downtown Colorado Springs. Today, I'm joined by Dianne Hartshorn, founder and director of Evergreen Heritage. Welcome, Dianne.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
Super to have you with us. This is going to be fun for our
Yes.
listeners. Before we get into your story and kind of getting into your background, tell listeners a little bit about the Evergreen Heritage and the Evergreen Cemetery.
Well, Evergreen Heritage was founded in 2004. The name at the time was the Evergreen Cemetery Benevolent Society. So we decided Evergreen Heritage was number one shorter, and it reflected more of what we did.
Okay.
So in working with keeping the heritage and the history of Evergreen and Fairview cemeteries, the Fairview Cemetery on the west side, alive.
Okay. So other than the fact that we're recording this in 2024, a week before Halloween, okay, people will probably be wondering, so why is Visit Colorado Springs featuring the Evergreen Cemetery as one of your attractions?
Oh.
And, people, you're going to, I think, find out a lot today from Dianne, and starting with the fact that it's, on the National Register
Right.
of Historic Places. So talk a little bit about the cemetery itself.
Well, as you said, Evergreen Cemetery is on the National Register of Historic Places. It was actually the second cemetery in Colorado to be placed on the National Register. Fairmont Cemetery in Denver was the first, and there's many others after us, but we were the second.
Yep.
And what is so unique about Evergreen Cemetery is that it follows the design of the rural cemetery movement. So those pretty much started back east with Mount Auburn, especially I think it's in Brooklyn, that people wanted more of a place that they could go to. It was usually the area's first parks. Evergreen Cemetery is it's definitely one of the first parks. Exception, that was the word I was looking for. And it is a place that when General Palmer founded Colorado Springs, he was very, very particular who he had involved in all the aspects. Mr. Blair was an architect, a landscape architect from Scotland, and he came out and he actually laid out the designs of Evergreen Cemetery in addition to Manitou Springs and the road from Manitou Springs up to Garden of the Gods.
Wow.
So it wasn't just by, we'll put this, they were very particular in how they laid it out.
Okay. We're going to come back to this because the one of the purposes of today is to share more information about the experience and what a gem we have. But Dianne, you are a unique person, okay?
I've been told that more than once.
And what is it in your background that first drew you to cemetery type work?
It has always been I've always had a love of cemeteries.
Right.
To begin with.
Okay.
I grew up in Canyon City, and there was a historic cemetery, Greenwood Cemetery, and my friends and I, that's where, now maybe at the time kids would maybe go to the mall. There weren't malls back then. So we would go to the cemetery and walk around and just wonder about the history, and it's just something I have always been fascinated with.
Was there a flashpoint? Was there something in your life, maybe whether teenage, college, that the switch flipped and you said, I can work at this?
Possibly two things. The first one was in about 1983. I had taken a trip the first time out of state, and I visited Charleston, South Carolina. And of course, I got to visit. I stayed in the historic area. So we visited Circular Congregational Church and visited the cemetery. which many of the headstones, that's the first time I saw the death head stones and the slate stones.
Yeah.
And from then on, I became involved with the Association of Gravestone Studies. And it was like, well, you're doing all this preservation back east. Granted, our headstones out here are maybe, 200 years newer. Why isn't there more things out there? And so that was my love of cemeteries. But then what really got me involved with cemetery preservation here locally was I had volunteered with the Colorado City Historical Society and participated in a couple of their walking tours where I portrayed Blanche Burton,
Yes.
one of the madams, and there were several of us standing around discussing the condition of Fairview Cemetery. Why is the fence down? Why isn't the city doing this, that, or the other? So I went in and spoke with the cemetery manager at the time, and he informed me that the cemetery is city-owned. Unfortunately, it is not city-funded. The preservation and the care of the headstones are up to the families.
Okay.
And he basically said, if you want to do something about it, volunteer.
Wow.
And so I've been doing it for 24 years.
Okay, so we are going to get into Evergreen, but I just can't let this go without thinking that perhaps there's somebody listening who you may have just piqued an interest.
Yes.
Okay. So whether it's a young person or somebody who's middle-aged and just kind of, what advice would you give somebody about making cemetery management a career?
Well, I'll tell you, cemetery conservation management, you don't do it for the money.
Yeah.
For number one. You have to have a love of history and taking the time to do. A lot of times what we're looking at in preservation, there are so many quicker, easier fixes, but to do it right takes a lot more money and time and just, basic skills. A couple of us have either gone back to Chicago at U.S. Heritage, have been trained.
Okay.
And then we also had, this is the third visit that John Appel with Atlas Preservation has been out, and we've taken tombstone restoration classes through him.
Okay. Wow. All right. So history is a real
Definitely.
common denominator,
Yes.
which makes a lot of sense. Okay. So let's now go a little bit more focused on the cemetery itself, because you said was it the first city park?
It was about the first city park.
Okay. What year?
It was founded in 1875, although there are burials that predate that.
Okay, interesting. Because our city was founded in 1871, so it technically opened 4 years after the city was founded.
So we are about technically the fifth cemetery, because of course Colorado City was there about 15 years before Colorado Springs.
Okay.
So they had, their own cemeteries, not counting Fairview. And then it was the El Paso County Cemetery that was located. It was funny because when I first started this, I could say next to Chrissy Fowler Lumber, next to Giuseppe's Depot, but now the parking lot of the Olympic Museum
Right.
was where the El Paso County Cemetery was. So as people came here for their health,
Yeah.
they pulled in on the train. The first thing they saw was the cemetery.
Right.
So General Palmer donated 10 to 40 acres of the original part, and then people were disinterred and moved to Evergreen.
Okay. Now, we know we have visitors and we have residents listening to this podcast, and Evergreen Cemetery would not come to the very top of the list of attractions that they would put into their itinerary, okay? Fair to say, which is why we have you sitting here, because what I want to have you describe for people is, whether you live here or whether you're visiting here, why should we make a trip to Evergreen Cemetery? What's the experience going to be like?
Oh my gosh. Okay, first of all, cemetery tourism is a big thing.
It's a big thing.
It's
okay.
a big thing. Right now, this time of year, Evergreen Cemetery is the most beautiful it has ever been. You can come view the turning of the trees. You do not have to deal with bumper-to-bumper traffic, either going up the pass or coming down the pass.
Right.
It is quiet. It is serene. The wildlife that makes Evergreen Cemetery home
Right.
is absolutely amazing. And it's very quiet. There's just something very sacred
Yeah.
about Evergreen.
Is Evergreen, is it accessible for people with disabilities and
Yes, all
wheelchair-
all the roads are paved.
Okay.
Yes, and
Okay.
when we've done tours in the past, there have been people that participated in the tours in electric wheelchairs. So
Sure. Awesome. So let's talk about tours. I mean, people may not even know that you can take a tour of Evergreen Cemetery.
right, for almost 20 years, we did the historic walking tour. Unfortunately, COVID sort of killed that for us. And then we have found other tours and events that we are able to raise more funds through that. But we are
Okay.
actually looking at bringing the walking tour back either in 2025 or for sure in 2026 for the 150th anniversary of statehood.
Okay, sure. That makes a lot of sense. In order to have a walking tour, because I have done it, I did it when you were still offering it pre-COVID. People would need to know that there are famous people particularly in Colorado Springs history that are buried at Evergreen.
Right.
So let's tease it out. Let's tell people a little bit about, even if they come before the walking tours start again, what are some of the famous people that they could look for?
Oh my goodness. I mean, we all know General Palmer. A lot of people do not know that Queen, his wife, Mary Lincoln Mellon Palmer, is buried here. We have Winfield Scott Stratton, Cripple Creek's first millionaire. We have Jimmy Burns, who he and Jimmy Doyle, they discovered the Portland mine in Cripple Creek. We have Helen Hunt Jackson. But it's the people that you don't read about every day that I think are the most interesting.
For instance,
one of the ones that came to mind is Spotswood rice. We found Spotswood rice purely by accident. A young man had come out looking for his grandmother, and we helped him locate that. And he goes, "By the way, have you heard of Spotswood rice?" And I'm like, "No." So we found where he's at. He's actually buried in the Civil War section because he was a Civil War soldier. But when you go to look him up online, Spotswood Rice was born into slavery. He gained his freedom, as there are actually a couple other ones at Evergreen who gained their service by joining with the Union to fight.
okay.
But Spotswood Rice could read and write. He actually, and his family was still enslaved, he actually wrote to the woman who owned them, informing her that he and his troops would be there to free them. Now, that didn't happen, but eventually the war ended, and he was able to travel, reunite with his family, and then he spent the rest of his life starting Methodist churches in the United States. He started one in New Mexico, as well as the one that is where Payne Chapel used to be.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
I don't want to say the name completely, but because I don't want to say it wrong.
Okay.
And then on the other end, we also have Captain Sheldon. Captain Sheldon, we did not know existed until when I was working at the cemetery before, a young gentleman called and said, we're doing this history project. I think they were out of Arkansas or something. We just want to confirm that he's buried there. I'm like, okay. So always the first question I ask is, so tell me about your project.
Right.
And they were working with the Network of Freedom. And this is anybody who was involved with the Underground Railroad.
Okay.
And Captain Sheldon was a conductor on the Underground Railroad.
Wow.
He only lived here 6 months. So most of his work was done, I believe, in Iowa when he was a young man. So this now puts us, we are part of the Network to Freedom
Okay.
through the National Park System. We are the only cemetery in the state, if not the West. I think, I'm sure there's some in California. And then we have a couple Buffalo soldiers buried there. So it's mind-blowing how many people, actually famous people in other parts of the country, are buried here in Colorado Springs.
Yeah, that's fascinating that he only lived here for 6 months.
Yes.
And is buried here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty. Who thunk? To your point, it's the stories behind the stories of the people that are not as well known.
Exactly.
What I remember about the tour that we took was that you had characters at the grave sites who would talk about
Right, exactly.
their lives, and so it was what a unique experience. And now that I think back on it, really, when you use this term cemetery tourism, okay, I'm wondering do you work with other cemeteries, or are like, I won't use the term reciprocal, but you know that if there are people that, let's say they play golf and they know that they'll want to golf on their itinerary will be full of different golf courses or things like that. Are there people who put together itineraries of cemeteries, and what are some complementary cemeteries that people could see here around Colorado?
Well, definitely Fairview Cemetery, because on Colorado Springs West Side, because that sort of has the working class.
Okay.
That has the madams. Not all madams. I mean, not everybody was a saloon keeper and a madam. But what is so unique about Fairview Cemetery is the two madams that we know of are buried within the grounds of the cemetery. Lower Bell's pretty much right inside the front gate. Where, say, for instance, up in Cripple Creek, except for maybe Pearl DeVere, most of the prostitutes are either unmarked or outside the cemetery.
Interesting. Okay. Just a quick cemetery story for you. Summer of 23, our son and I, he and I were over in Iceland. And someone, as we were doing kind of our research, told us that the great chess player Bobby Fischer is buried near Reykjavik.
Oh, wow.
And so Ryan and I decided to find Bobby Fischer, and so somebody finally said, okay, well, here's his burial site. And as we're winding down these roads, and we've said, we've got to be lost. There's no way. And we come upon this little tiny church, and there's nobody there. And we walk inside, we open the gate to the cemetery next to the church, and there it is, like at the front.
Wow.
And I share that to someone like yourself, that Ryan and I would just kind of laugh and going, we didn't come to Iceland thinking we were going to be looking for Bobby Fischer's grave, but we found it, and it was like a big check mark.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like when I first saw those slate headstones from the late 1600s, early 1700s, and then I was reading about stone carvers, and one happened to be, his last name was Hartshorn. Come to find out, it was after I married my Hartshorn. He's a descendant of my husband's a descendant of his.
Wow.
But the cool thing was, this summer I went back with my daughter to Rhode Island, and we took a trip to Salem, and our son came up and met us from New York, and we went up to Ipswich, where someone I had met who also does conservation work in a much older cemetery.
Okay.
And that's how we met on Instagram, where she goes, do you happen to be related to this Hartshorn head stone carver? And I said, no, that's my husband. But in her cemetery were several of his stones, because he had a very unique how he made the death head. But then my kids got to see his actual carved stone. So it was like, I'm not going to say it was so cool, but it was so beyond cool for them to see that in person.
Yeah, I guess that wouldn't be the circle of life. That would be like the circle of death.
Or circle of history.
Circle of history. Better said. Okay, so if there are people who want to get involved with preservation or volunteering. How do they do that?
Well, we do have a website. It's Evergreen Heritage CS for ColoradoSprings.com. And there is a place where you can sign up to join our newsletter.
Okay.
And because right now we have a very small core group of volunteers this will probably be our last Monday for the year. We've been working every Monday through beginning of May doing restoration projects. We focused this year on raising veteran headstones. We worked with VFW Post 101 in their section, which is the original Civil War section.
Okay.
So we formed a collaboration with that. So, yeah.
All right, and so people can sign up,
Yes.
get newsletters, and find out more.
Right.
The cemetery is open 24/7, or is it?
No.
No. What are the hours?
Okay, the gates are open, I think now we're in the winter hours. I believe it's 7 in the morning to 6 at night.
Okay.
So basically dawn to dusk, and you don't need to be after dark
Sure.
anyway. And then it's open 7 days a week.
Okay. All right. So it is
But
open.
not the office, but the cemetery grounds
and
themselves.
in the summer?
I think it's 7 to 8, possibly. Again, sunrise. I think it's to 8, yeah.
And out of sheer curiosity, how big a staff do you have if you count in paid staff as well as volunteers? How many people are involved in the operation?
Hang on. Maybe 8.
Maybe 8 of you.
And that's for 2 cemeteries.
Okay. Wow. Got it. Now, for listeners to understand that Dianne is not just, yes, she has a day job in which she gets paid to oversee Evergreen, but you also have your own podcast about cemeteries, and it's called The Ordinary, Extraordinary Cemetery.
Yes.
Can you tell listeners a little bit about what that is and where they can tune in?
We started this. It was actually my co-host, Jenny Johnston. We were Facebooking each other in regards to a preservation class that was happening pre-COVID? And up in Leadville in September, and needless to say, it snowed. So it was canceled, but her and I just started communicating back and forth. And she reached out and she goes, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. Would you like to co-host this with me? Never done this before, anything. And I went, sure. So about over 200 episodes later,
wow.
This is our 4th year of doing it. And our goal, and the reason she started this, was most of the cemetery podcasts that are out there focus on the paranormal and hauntings and ghost stories. We do not. We focus on the stories and the lives, and it has been such a blast. And we have had some amazing, amazing guests.
I wouldn't necessarily want to put you on the spot and ask you about a favorite, but as people are listening, and let's hope we've piqued their curiosity, if there was a podcast that you would point them to and say, this is, and it might have even been your most recent one, but because about Gettysburg, but what would you say to somebody? Say, yeah, you want to hear kind of one of the best of? What's one of your favorites you look back on?
Okay, so I actually messaged Jenny this morning, because this is what I'm doing. Give me your favorites. Because I don't want to have to pick. Because like I was telling you, it's like, which one's your favorite child?
Right.
So I made a list real quick. So one of our first ones was episode number 34, and we interviewed Ruth Robinson, who was the soldier with the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington.
Oh, wow.
And I believe she was one of the first female guards of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier.
Okay.
And so it went into everything that, not that she went through, that she does for that, and that to be selected. Our next one has, both of these actually have sort of local ties, was episode 158, and we interviewed Connie Kelwood Pitt, who is involved with the Young Marines here in town, and she has volunteered at Evergreen for forever.
Okay.
But her dad was a Navajo code talker.
Wow.
And so we got to hear in her words his story. And then, and this actually also had a local connection. Episode 185, we interviewed Major General Maury Elder, who actually, this book was listed on the Pikes Peak Library District when they all district reads or something.
Okay.
And this is, oh my God, it's an amazing book.
So to give people the title that might be just listening.
The Girls Who Stepped Out of Line.
Okay.
And it is about women during World War II, even though the wasps are on the front.
Right.
And we thought that's what the book was about, because we actually have 2 wasps buried in Evergreen.
Okay.
But this is about freedom fighters, ones who went in that with the Holocaust and what would you call them? They went in and they helped get people out of Germany, and a lot of spies.
Yeah, interesting.
And so it was absolutely, I think everybody should read this book.
Okay, fabulous. The girls
Not a plug, but
The Girls Who Stepped Out of Line.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so before we wrap, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's episode, which is the Soccer House Sports and Events. Unleash your inner champion of Colorado Springs' premier indoor sports and event powerhouse, located off the west side of Garden of the Gods Road. Soccer House is a 48,000 square foot adrenaline pumping playground designed to ignite your competitive spirit and elevate your game to new heights. The venue offers corporate events, birthday parties, community holiday events, food and drink at Upper 90 Tavern, and sponsorship opportunities for businesses. So whether you're a seasoned pro or a weekend warrior, or just looking for a venue to host your event for an unbeatable experience, Soccer House is your ticket to heart-pounding action and unforgettable memories. So, all right, so Dianne, we wrap our show with 3 questions.
okay.
And the first one is, in 3 words, how would you describe Colorado Springs?
Beautiful, historic. I was trying to think, how would you describe Garden of the Gods? How would you describe beautiful, historic? Oh, it's hard because it's like,
almost picture perfect. Those
yeah, because
places,
it's like, even though it's grown so much since we first moved here, we are so very blessed and lucky to have what we have here, and that we can just many of us can just, depending where you live in town, either 15 minutes or 45 minutes to just, you're in the mountains. You're in some of the most beautiful country in the state.
Beautifully said. Okay. Do you have a favorite hidden gem somewhere here in the Pikes Peak region that you like to go to?
Cemetery. I hate to say, it's probably the cemetery.
Cemetery, Evergreen
Yeah.
for you is
Especially
your...
the older area.
Okay, that's your
That's
play.
it.
And it's actually a beautiful definition of a hidden gem.
It is,
So
it's true.
that I would not be surprised to hear you say that. Do you still have something on your Colorado Springs bucket list that you have not done that you will admit to listeners?
And it went right out of my head. The Manitou Springs Cliff Dwellings.
The cliff dwellings.
Because we were starting to do some research on, and I don't remember what the anniversary was, and I'm gonna feel bad. I can't remember her name. There was a woman who was very instrumental in bringing it to where it's at now. And granted, I think she got it from Dolores, the ruins, because they're actually ruins. They're just not ruins from Manitou Springs.
Right.
But the idea was that's right after Mesa Verde was discovered, and so much of those artifacts were going overseas. In fact, I remember as a kid going there, and that we were told the largest collection of Mesa Verde artifacts is in Germany, because they're the ones that discovered it. So I think it's Virginia McDowell. Her husband also started the flower parade, so they were very instrumental. But that is the one place I have not been.
All right. So it's out there now.
It's out there.
And yeah, you should.
I'm going to have to go.
You should probably check that box.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, this has been great, Dianne. And I guess what I'd ask you to do in wrapping is to remind listeners how they can find out more information, and let's let them know where the cemetery is located.
Okay, so Evergreen Cemetery is located at the corner of Fountain and Hancock. The address is 100 Hancock Expressway. To get involved, we have our website, evergreenheritagecs.com. And you are also more than welcome to stop by the cemetery office. We have information there as well. Fairview Cemetery is 1000 South 26th Street, and of course on Colorado's west side.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Dianne, thanks for joining us
Thank
today
you.
and talking about cemetery tourism. It's just one of those. I love that it was your hidden gem, because I hope for others they'll listen and discover and take you up on your invitation to come see the cemetery.
I don't think a lot of people realize what we have at Evergreen.
Great, thanks. Enjoyed sitting with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.